Right. Thanks everyone who's here in person. Thanks for those of you who are on Zoom. Sorry we're late getting started, but I have a few slides to talk about presentations. And I know presentations are coming up in just under 2 weeks' time. So you all will be presenting your research on the 19th of August on Saturday. So what I have are some slides about do's and don'ts for technical talks. We'll be giving a technical talk on Saturday, August 19th, and a talk about your research. I also have some slides about writing technical papers. I'll get to those in the end if we have time. But really the focus for today is presentations, since that's coming up on the 19th of August. For those of you who are on Zoom, can you tell me if you can hear me okay? Otherwise, I'll make sure I speak up. How am I sounding on those? Okay, great. Thank you, Julia. Thanks. Perfect. Okay. So I want to give credit where credit's due. This particular slide set was of which I realized the original format of this presentation was do's and don'ts, and then a sample presentation at the end. I don't see that sample presentation. That didn't translate from PowerPoint to Google Slides. So in any case, a lot of the credit for this goes to one of my former PhD students, Claire Dorman, who really had a lot of expertise in pedagogy and really thought a lot about how to explain things, she was an excellent communicator herself, but this presentation was encouraging others to do things that make for an effective presentation. So before we go too much further, I know our focus is on presentation day, and for some reason, okay, this is fine. I'd like to ask each of you to think about a great presentation or talk that you've seen recently. And I'd love to hear from you, whether you're on Zoom or in person, about what aspect of that presentation or talk made it memorable to you, made it effective in communicating what the speaker was trying to deliver. You can just take a few minutes to think about that, and you can chat out your answer to me if you're on Zoom. If you're in person, think about something you've heard recently, or maybe not even recently, that made it an effective talk. And I'd love to hear what elements of that, of this one aspect of it, one or more aspects of that presentation that made it effective or memorable for you. Anyone? Anyone at all? I've heard many effective talks over time.
Huh? A little bit.
We can hear you. Go ahead. Was that someone on Zoom wanting to speak up? Please do. I'm not getting any responses on Zoom. Anyone here? Anything at all? Anything? Was it humor that made it effective? Was it, yeah, the passion with which which the speaker delivered the message? Yeah, that's a good one. It's very difficult to get the audience excited about your talk if you yourself are not excited about it, right? I mean, that's yeah. Okay, I have some things on the chat. Fantastic. Very good, Neela, thank you. Everyone can see what Neela's written recently, and I'll read it out for those in the audience. I recently heard the speech, in quotes, "The Power of Words" by Mohammed Katani, and I admired the way he grabbed the audience, with his passion. Again, Zoe mentioned favorite TED Talk from Mark Ronson. passionate during the talk. And that's come up 3 times now. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to try and sound passionate about this. This is something that is meaningful to me, effective communication. Okay, but before we go too much further into the generics of giving a talk, I want to focus on Saturday, August 19th, 2023. It's coming up in, today's the 8th, so it's coming up in 11 days, week and a half. We're going to start bright and early. We're actually going to start not at 8:45, but 8:30. Sorry, that's a mistake. Actually, we do our introductions at 8:15. So maybe I should change this. And since we're going to send these slides around, this should be, we start at 8:15, not 8:45. Ooh. Sorry about that. We start at 8:15 with introductions. The research presentations start at 8:30. We have 2 hours of talks, so 15 minutes per talk, 2 hours of talks. That means 8 talks for the first 2 hours. Then we have a half-hour break, and then we have another 8 talks in the same room. So total of 16 talks in a given room, and we'll have 8 such rooms going in parallel. So a total of 128 talk slots. I think we have 121 talks. So we have a little bit of extra room, because some of the presentations are going to be longer than 15 minutes because there's, one of the projects has 9 interns on it. So they'll take a bit of extra time. But there are others with more than the nominal 3 interns per project. Please be sure on your opening slide, please be sure to write, if you're an intern and you're preparing your slides. By the way, you're doing this as a Google Slides presentation. You see that written there. We want each presentation to be its own Google Slide presentation. We won't have a master slide deck for all the talks. That's going to be too unwieldy. So every group's presentation will be a single Google Slides presentation. If you have embedded videos in there, make sure you give permission for others to view that video, because we may not be using your computer or your account to access the Google Slides. We might be using the session chair's computer and account. So make sure any videos you embed in the Google Slides presentation has permission for everyone to view. Very important that on your opening slide, the names of the interns should appear on the opening slide. First name and last name, school name as well. When you introduce yourself, and each group will be introducing themselves, the session chair won't be introducing you. Each group will be introducing themselves. Please say your first name and last name in that order. Don't just say your first name. In professional presentations, people use their first and last name. That's what I see at conferences. I would say your first and last name, school name. Say your names in alphabetical order by last name, even if you're speaking in a different order during the presentation, that's how you should list your names on the slide. That's how you should introduce yourself. You had practice doing this. Some of you had practice doing this during our global showcase. Please make sure to write and mention your mentor's name on the opening slide. You may also want to acknowledge them near the end of your presentation. Not you may want to, you should definitely acknowledge people at the end, including your mentor, of course. You have 15 minutes per project. That means your speaking part is more like between 13 and 14 minutes. We need a minute for Q&A. People can, of course, continue to ask questions on the Zoom link, because this will be a hybrid event on the 19th. So we haven't put aside a lot of time for Q&A because people can continue to ask questions afterwards on the chat on Zoom. Now, but if you speak for 13 to 14 minutes and we have 1 minute to change, 1 minute for Q&A, that leaves hardly any time to change over to the next speaker. So really plan on something between 13 and 14 minutes distributed across the interns who are going to be speaking about the project. Let me think of anything I may have missed on this opening slide. Okay, there's something here that I'm going to Yeah, I'll get into this later. Okay, this is as far as this, I don't know what that, okay, there we go. So, why should you give a good presentation? Let's talk about that. We'll talk about effective slide layout. We'll talk about storyboarding your presentation, organizing your story, talk about delivery, and we won't do an example presentation. My presentation to you today is an example presentation, okay? So you can see that my slide layout doesn't contain like a ton of words. This is, again, it's not my slide layout, it's Claire's slide layout. But Claire's slides don't contain a lot of words. She doesn't want to overwhelm you with too much information. Why do we make presentations? What's the goal of making a presentation? If the research you do stays only with you and doesn't get communicated to others who are, whether they're experts in the field or non-experts in the field, it's really a lost opportunity. Other people can't build on your work unless you tell people what you've done. So I believe this is true for all academics across all disciplines, you have to present your work in some format. In some disciplines, you write books to present your work. In some disciplines, you write journal articles to present your work. And one thing that all academics do is give talks. And this is what you'll be doing on August 19th. You want to convey to the audience what work you've done in the course of the summer. It's fine for it to be a progress report. We don't expect there to be a result or discovery or some earth-shattering progress at the end. When you worked on this for 8 weeks, a researcher's time is often measured in months, years, sometimes decades. So we don't expect you to have done Nobel Prize winning work in 8 weeks. We don't expect that. That's not a realistic expectation. Presenting what you've done, a progress report, presenting what you think comes next. These are good things to include in your talk, but also very importantly, presenting the big picture. Why is this work important? This is something I'll get to later on. Why is this work relevant, important? Contextualizing your work is going to be super important, and you'll work with your mentors on this. Okay. But presenting your work is just an essential thing. Without that, the work dies with the researcher unless they present it. Your goals are to inform your audience, to educate them, to motivate them, the passion you just heard about, and to persuade them that they should take this seriously, that they should be impressed by the work you've done. Inform, educate, motivate, persuade. Your goal is to explain your work to your audience. Your goal is not to try to impress them by throwing out technical words that they don't understand. That will quickly cause you to lose members of the audience. And instead of being impressed, they won't know what you've done. They won't have any way of assessing what work you've done. So even though you've done technical work, highly technical work over the summer in different disciplines for each of you, the goal is to explain this to a non-technical audience. And this is a really, really hard thing to do. I expect every high school intern who'll be presenting on Saturday to work closely with your mentors on this. To take something technical that you worked on for the better part of 8 weeks and to present that in a way that is accessible to non-experts in the field without diluting the technical rigor of the work is a real balancing act. And it's something that takes years of practice, and it's going to be a wonderful learning experience for each of you. Again, I remember saying, I've heard other people say this, and I remember saying this to students, don't sprinkle SAT words like confetti into your presentation. Okay, that's not going to impress. Use the simplest possible language that explains what you're trying to say. Don't use complicated words when you don't need to. Okay, and in particular, if you're going to use words that are technical, explain what they mean in the context of your talk. Okay, let's talk about slide layout a little bit. You want visual appeal. I encourage you to use color. You notice that there's some colors being used here. I noticed this is the colors that Claire is using here are the colors of the Indian flag. Saffron, white, and green, right? I mean, this is, I just noticed that. I don't know why Claire used these three colors. Aren't these the colors of the Indian flag? Rohit should know, right? Isn't it saffron on top, white in the middle, and green at the bottom? Okay. Anyway, I digress. Visual appeal, easy to read, clear, concise. In fact, one thing we'll get to is a lot of people will tell you one idea, one slide. Okay, so don't put multiple ideas onto the same slide. Each slide should be a different idea. It's almost like when you're writing, every paragraph should be a distinct idea. You should connect them, of course. Successive slides should connect. So you might give some, you want to give a lot of thought to how you order your slides and to build a set of ideas that link to one another in successive slides to tell a story. Okay, so Claire picked up, made two sort of example plots, she calls them two example talks, but on the left is a plot from a real astronomy project. And on the right is a completely fictitious plot from a made-up SIP project about admissions rate into some program. Not SIP. SIP's admission rate is not 80%. So these are examples where what she did was, keep things simple, right? You don't have to write down everything you're going to say about the talk. So if I was showing the plot on the left, I might want to either say or annotate what the x-axis is about, because saying F475W minus 814W mag is not particularly illuminating to the audience. You want to say what the x-axis is a measure of, and it turns out in this case the x-axis is a measure of the the temperature of a star. Every dot is a star. The y-axis is a measure of how luminous, how bright or faint the star is. So in an ideal world, you wouldn't just present those numbers. You'd have this, if you had this plot occupying the slide, you might have some words that explain what the x-axis is, some words that explain what the y-axis is, instead of just using the technical jargon here. The slide on the right is a bit more self-explanatory. You may not need too many props to explain what that is. Everyone knows what an admission rate is. Everyone knows what N is, what the number of students is. But still, I might want to explain, what program it is, whose admission rate we're talking about, and what does it mean when we, what does N mean? Are we talking about multiple programs and looking at their admission rate as a percentage? I would want more explanation around that. Here's an example of a terrible slide. Okay, I have this up here because this slide is terrible in many different ways. Okay, I'd love for you to chat or shout out some ways in which this slide is not working for you. It's certainly not working for me. I'll turn the lights down a little bit over here so you can see how bad this slide is. Oh, trying to get rid of these lights, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so what's wrong with this slide? I mean, and those of you in Zoom, you can see this. Okay. Too much information on a single slide. Hard to see the text against the background. Neon yellow font color, too bright for the viewer's eyes. Okay. Too many words, graph is difficult to understand. Too many words, distracting background picture. Anything else? Anything else? This murder on the colorblind. I'm a colorblind person. This is really horrible for me. It's very hard for me to see anything. There's that same plot again with very little explanation. There's a random formula equation thrown in there with no meaning at all. So this contains many of the things you want to avoid. It's fine to have a picture in the background, but you want to make sure it's muted, its colors are muted, so that the text, that's the main focus. If the text or plot is the main focus of your slide, the background image shouldn't distract from it. There are ways to mute it. You can put a dark, in this case, you could put a black rectangle over it, make it semi-transparent, so you can still see the image, but its colors are heavily muted. You'd want the font to be bigger, less text, all of those things, yeah. This is a much better example of a plot. First of all, you'll notice it contains the same plot that the previous one did. So it's the same plot, except there's more annotation. This time, the background image is gone. There's very little text. There's an image of a family of stars on the left, and there's a connection between that image and the plot on the right. The x-axis is labeled so that blue stars, the x-axis corresponds to blue and red colors, which correspond to temperature. It points to a faint blue star, and it points to a bright red star. Again, trying to connect a picture to a set of measurements. You see the y-axis says faint and bright. Again, it's a lot of the arrows and things got messed up in the translation from PowerPoint to Google Slides. I'm sorry, we haven't fixed those yet. But there's a sharp contrast between this slide and this slide, even though in the end, they're trying to convey the same information. Bad, good, much better, at least. Now, I'm breaking my own rule by putting too much text on this one slide. Well, this is meant to be an example bad slide, as you can see. It's bad in many ways here. Again, if you can list some ways in which you think this is bad. So what do you think? Boring in terms of colors, right? Black on white, that's about the most boring color combination you can choose. A lot of text. Yep, very good. A lot of use of full sentences. Too much information for one slide. Very good. Thanks, Anika. Thanks, Julia. When you can write things in bullet form, you could just say, for example, source of data, Institute for Research Program Statistics. That's a made-up institute, but still, you could say that. Isolated SIP program data. These are examples of bullet points instead of writing full sentences. Kolmogorov-Smirnov comparison of two histograms. Writing bullet points instead of full sentences. Yeah, Molly, very good. It isn't telling you anything in the end. So there isn't a bottom line to this slide. If it really is giving a test statistic cutoff of 0.05, that doesn't say very much. Explaining in non-technical language what the main result is here would have been nice. Use consistent, uniform slide templates. Don't go jumping all over the place with different fonts and colors. Don't overload your slide with pictures or words. Use colors and symbols sensibly and sparingly, no more than 3 colors per slide, probably. Think about what colors are easy to see. Again, consistent font sizes, styles for text and headings, minimize text, incorporate visuals as much as possible. And this is a big difference between writing a technical paper which tends to be more word heavy versus giving a talk, which tends to be more heavy on visuals. Choose which graphs you're going to show. You're not going to be able to show every single graph that you generated, or every single plot or result you generated, every single piece of prose you wrote over the summer. Pick and choose. what you're going to present. Now, remember, the slide is for your audience. It's not for you. It's not meant to be a list of talking points that you're going to read through. Your notes are for that. You can have a set of notes on a separate screen or on your phone. You can have notes. Your slide is a visual aid for the audience. It's not a set of speaker notes for you. It's a very important distinction, okay, between two completely different uses of a slide. It should be the first, it should not be the second. You can have text slides. It's not to say you can't have slides with text. You can have conceptual slides. You can have conceptual slides are often could be visual in nature, and you could have quantitative charts, again, that are, a conceptual slide could also be something like a flow chart that explains a set of ideas, a set of organization of things. Claire was a big proponent of putting the takeaway message as the slide title, you know, like literally a title that says, these two bright red stars dominate the light of such and such cluster, you know, something, an actual result. She was a big fan of that. So if you put your takeaway message at the top and you have a figure or diagram illustrating why that takeaway message is important, you know, that's very powerful. By the way, anyone recognize the two names, the two credits at the bottom of the picture? Yeah. Sorry? Only one of them is a Nobel laureate. Yeah, Andrea is a Nobel laureate. She's a professor of astronomy at the University of California, Los Angeles. And Caroline Morley, I think, worked with her as an undergraduate. She was a grad student here. She's now a faculty member somewhere else. Caroline was a SIP mentor for many years. And so she got this message from her advisor, incorporated this into our slide thing. But Andrea and I were hired at the same time in the UC system and long time friend. She got the Nobel Prize for study of the black hole at the center of the galaxy. Andrea did. All right. Again, some of these things I've said already. General slide format suggestions, one idea per slide, simple background. You know, maybe not one sentence, but I would be fine with a few sentences, one or two supporting figures. Use thick lines. You know, don't, you know, sometimes you make a plot. If you're working in my field, you might make a plot in Python. If the lines are not, lines and axis labels aren't big enough, you might want to relabel your axes in PowerPoint or Google Slides. Use large text. I don't necessarily follow the 30-point myself, but avoid formulae unless it's really important. But if you do need to use the formula, explain it. Explain what the different terms are. This is an example of a figure that's not very projector friendly because the line is very thin. The graph is very thin. This is an example of a projector friendly figure where the line is much thicker. The x-axis and y-axis numbers are much bigger. Same Caroline Morley. This is something she put together. Okay. And I want to save some time for Q&A at the end. So I'm moving quickly. I'm going to move quickly through the rest of the slides. Organizing your presentation is super important. Telling your story, super important. You're taking your audience on a journey. Okay, you're telling them a story, beginning to end. Some people use humor. Don't overdo it. You're not a stand-up comic for this purposes of this presentation. But if it takes using humor to engage your audience, I love doing that myself. Bring your work to life. Bring, you know, make it meaningful. Connect your audience to your work. Choose something that's cohesive and coherent. Don't keep jumping around in terms of how you're presenting your story. And definitely consider the order and how ideas are flowing from one slide to the next. If you really think of your slides as one idea per slide, think of how these ideas are connecting to one another and how they're flowing through your story. When you're writing a technical paper, you think about the same things as you would in a talk. You want to start by, I always tell my students this, write an outline. In bullet points, write out the entire story first before you write sentences. Write down bullet points. I don't want to see the sentences first. I want to see the outline first. Same is true for slides. Before you start writing your slides, write an outline. I really made this for myself. I've made this complete habit. Every time I'm giving a new talk, whether it's a very short talk or a much longer talk. Short talks, by the way, are the hardest because you have a limited amount of time. You have to hit every point you're going to make. There's no room for, it has to be really tight. It has to be very carefully planned. I find short talks are harder to plan than longer talks. Write an outline before you start writing your slides. In other words, plan what the order of ideas is going to be that you're going to convey before you actually start writing the slides. It's very easy to start writing text sometimes and get attached to that text, and then you're tempted to include it whether it fits or not. Don't do that. Write the outline first. Okay. Now, I'm going to say this multiple times, but a good way to think about, and I've thought about this in the context of science talk, so I apologize to those in the audience who haven't worked on a science project, who worked on a different research project. Your way of storytelling may be a little different. But for science talks, I'm often thinking about background. Why did I do this work? What was the motivation behind this work? What's the bigger picture? Another way of asking this is your mentor has an ongoing research project that's bigger than the part you worked on, bigger in terms of research scope, more long-lasting in terms of time. It started before you started, and it's going to continue after the SIP program ends. Think about that bigger effort. Why is it important? How does it relate to other researchers? It shouldn't say scientists. How does it relate to other researchers' work? If you're going to be using particular concepts or technical words, jargon, explain them at the outset. But again, why was this work done? So think of it as an elevator pitch. You have someone who's riding in the elevator with you from the ground floor to the 5th floor. The elevator takes 10 seconds to get there, or maybe half a minute to get there. That's how much time you have to explain why the work you've done for 8 weeks is important. If I'm studying galaxies and I'm trying to understand the origin of the elements that make up the periodic table and make up complex life on Earth, that's very simple motivation for saying, this is why I study galaxies, because I'm interested in the origin of the elements. Without our big galaxy, without our presence in a big galaxy, we wouldn't have the elements we have in the periodic table. We wouldn't have complex life on Earth. That didn't take very long, but that's a way to motivate some of the work I do. Now, that's very specific to the work I do. Each of you has to find that why, the answer to that why is this work important? Why should you stay awake during my presentation and listen to what I have to say? Okay. Once you explain the why, you want to talk about what you've done. Okay, what are the methods, data? What are your research methods? What are your research data sets that you're playing with? So what question, not a why. Okay, the first question is a why did I do the work? Second is, what you actually did. In biology papers, I've seen this often, they call them methods and materials. In astronomy papers, it's often data and sometimes data and data analysis even. So one of those is what kind of information, and data is what kind of information. Analysis is how you're processing that information, how you're looking for patterns, or how you're analyzing that data. What you did. This can be the bulk of your presentation, because for most of you, you've done work over the summer on a particular thing. What you did could be the bulk of your presentation. That would be just fine. what you found counts as results. If you found a particular pattern, if you notice that, sample, if you're comparing two things and you found one is, one is working better than something else. Again, I'm making this up very generically. Results are what you found, not what you did, but what you found. If you saw a particular pattern, if you saw a trend in some quantity against another quantity, or if you're doing, if you're working on a project in history, if you found that, if you're doing some analysis of existing text, could be in literature, it could be in history. Again, I'm really out of my depth here when I'm thinking about what results constitute in those fields, but results are what you found. Conclusions or implications are what they mean. Okay, so what you found versus what it means. So when you see a pattern, you make an astronomy plot, some quantity X versus Y, you see a trend. What does that trend mean? What is the underlying physical basis for that trend? That I would call a conclusion or implication. That's different from results. Result is the pattern that you see, the trend you see. What the underlying cause is the implication or conclusion. And of course, you should talk about future work, because your work hasn't killed off all research in the field. I hope it hasn't, right? I mean, I've heard students get up and give presentations after their summer research, and it sounds like cancer is now a solved problem. I've heard really students give that kind of talk. You realize then that they haven't understood the broader context at all. If they think they've, guess what? Cancer is not a solved problem. It's just not. So make sure you explain to the audience how far you've gotten and what lies ahead. You started at the beginning of the summer and you could see a certain distance down the road. Through your work in the summer, you've made progress, and now you can see further down that road. You want to convey what you see ahead that you won't have time to tackle. You want to convey that because that's a great way of connecting your work to the next set of researchers who pick up this project and take it forward. And very importantly, research is never done in isolation. You relied on your mentor, sometimes on your faculty advisor, you relied on your or their collaborators. Acknowledge them. Acknowledge who enabled you to complete the research, whether it was your family that helped you get here. Certainly it was your mentor and mentor's advisors, any other aspects that made this research possible, meaningful and fun for you. Please acknowledge them. It's really important to do that, and do that at the end. People often have one or more slides dedicated to that, and they speak through that slide. Okay. I'm going to go into a few more details, and then I promise I'll take questions, or open it up for discussion. This is from Claire. An outline on the left that's generic. My outline is first going to give an introduction, then talk about data, methods, results, future work. Claire prefers, and I like this, an introduction that explains what the background is, right there in one sentence. Because if all you take away is that box, that green text box, you would have taken away a summary of the entire talk. That the background of this talk is research experience in high school is thought to improve retention in STEM fields in college. If that were the subject of your research. The data show that college admission rates for students in one such program, what method you're using, what the results are, and what future work is. So she's written an example of an outline that actually tells the whole story. My thesis advisor used to say to me that if you want to say something, tell people what you're going to say, then say it, and then tell them what you said. Say it 3 times. And this is the first time you say it is in your outline. Okay, let's see. Let me move on. I'm sorry again for the slide getting mangled, but this is an example of a storyboarding slide where you're really grouping your slides into, in this case, 4 categories. You're motivating the talk with 3 slides. Then you're talking about your data or methods in the green slides, first the green slides in the upper right, then the green slides in the lower left. And then you're sort of concluding and talking about future work in the blue slides in the lower right. Okay, so this is really slide by slide breakdown of your talk. It's everyone I've spoken to about this knows this about me. If I'm writing a complicated email to someone, I will often write an outline first because I want to make sure I cover the ideas in the right order. Because without that, I don't want to start writing. I want to make sure I go systematically through a message I'm trying to convey. When you're delivering, you've all heard passion, really show excitement, engagement of yourself with the work. That's, if you're passionate about the work, that will certainly, that'll be meaningful to your audience. Read your audience, understand what they are connecting to. And this is difficult to do, but read your audience, understand who your audience is beforehand. One of the things we talked about is remember that your audience on presentation day won't be experts in the research topics that you worked on. So it's very important to be able to know that you're speaking to non-experts in your particular field, whether you're talking about chemistry or physics or astronomy or literature or history. Your audience will not be experts in that field. So if you know your audience, it's easier to connect with them. Project your voice. I'm trying to speak loudly here. I asked at the beginning, I always do at the beginning of a talk, I ask if people in the back of the room can hear me. Today, there's no one in the back of the room, so I had to ask folks on Zoom whether they could hear me. Right? If people have if they're struggling to hear you or understand you, you would have lost them right there. They're focused on trying to hear you rather than take in the content of what you're delivering. Project your voice, use positive body language, relax, breathe. If you're comfortable as a presenter, that will project. Don't turn around and look at the screen like the person in the picture on the right. Explain, don't complicate. It's very common for people to turn around and look at the screen. You've lost your audience at that point. You have your laptop. Use your laptop. If you have to point, you can use cursor like I'm doing here. Don't be like this person on the right. Please don't turn away. What's worse is sometimes people are using a handheld microphone like this. Sorry, I shouldn't move away from the camera. But sometimes people are using a handheld microphone like this, and they look back at their screen. You've lost eye contact. You've lost voice contact because you're no longer talking into your microphone, right? So avoid that. If you are going to turn, remember your microphone is connected to your, think of it as connected to your mouth as you're turning around, but don't turn around if possible. You don't need to point at the screen. You can, you're using Google Slides, use your cursor. You can get fancy cursors, right? That are much more prominent than this little arrow you see here. You can do that. I know you can. I can set that up in Zoom. How can I do that right now? Under there? No. Turn on the laser pointer. There we go. Oops, sorry. Yeah, in general. Okay, so here's a pointer that's doing a little bit better. Right? Can you guys see it? Yeah. It looks like a runaway mouse or something. Anyway, but it's a little better than that little arrow. Easier for people to follow. Anand, you mentioned Zoom etiquette. Say that again. Right. Yeah, making eye contact, whether that means looking into the camera of your laptop if you're doing this presentation online, or looking at your audience if you're doing this talk in person. I mean, engagement, this is part of engagement, is making eye contact, which is what I'm trying to do when I speak to each of you. Explain rather than complicate, very important. Really try to explain. The best compliments I've heard of speakers is you took a complicated subject and you made that understandable. Okay, people recognize that it's a complicated subject, but you've made it understandable. Okay, that's really important. I won't go into the details of these. Prepare, practice, 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 practice. That's what all of next week is for. Giving a talk makes you a better researcher because you realize when giving a talk that there are logical inconsistencies in your story that forces you sometimes to go back and do your research better, because it's only when you're trying to explain to people what you've done that you realize there are logical gaps, there are logical inconsistencies, and that's a great way to fix it. Okay, I have nothing else by way of slides. I want to open this up to questions. Zoe, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot.
Hi, yeah, no problem. I was just wondering if there's going to be a Q&A for the interns after each presentation. I know time is tight, but I just wanted to check in.
No, thanks for asking that, Zoe. I think there'll be, because time is tight, we're setting aside something like a minute for Q&A, but because we'll have a Zoom link going in every one of the presentation rooms, I encourage the speakers, after they've given their talk, to connect to that Zoom call. I mean, they'll be connected while they're at their computer, but after they walk away from the podium, to connect on their phones to the Zoom call and answer questions on the chat. That in past years, especially in the last few years when we were running presentation day entirely online, this was a very effective way to include a sustained set of questions and answers.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure, sure. Other questions, other comments about presentation day and about technical talks? I do have, there are a couple of things that we have examples of talks that other interns have given in past years. And I can put, we could share the screen. I also wanted to, yeah, let's put the, Anand is going to put the link in the chat, but we have, we've recorded presentations from interns in past years, and this might be helpful for you to look at, especially if it's a presentation in your own discipline, in the same discipline that you worked on this year. So Anand is putting the link in the chat, and there's a password. Yeah. So PV stands for presentation videos. Now, from that website, you can also easily get to 2021, 2020, 2019. The password just changes to PV and then the 4 digits of the year. But you know, every one of these on this site, it may not look like much, but if you go to, let's go to 2022, for example, and you'll notice that the title of the talk, I believe, is the link, or is it the? It's right. Oh, it's right there. Sorry, it's the project code is a link.
Hi, my name is Mira Bertaeva. I'm from Nazarbayev Intellectual.
So you can see that these people, this group of interns has followed the rule of writing down their project title, project code. They've written their names in alphabetical order by last name. At least when Mira introduced herself, she said her first and last name. They have their school after their name in parentheses. Include a location. By the way, if anyone knows what Almaty KZ is, that would be great. That's actually, she's from a school in Kazakhstan. That's what the KZ stands for.
This is a really good job.
School, yeah, same thing.
Mentor, SIP logo.
Yeah, we can send around the SIP logo if you'd like to include that, or the.
Should I add this link?
Yeah, okay. I'll talk through this link in a second. But other questions, please. This is a good time to discuss any. How many people are feeling nervous about their presentation on Saturday? Quick show of hands. Oh wow, I have one hand in the room. One. I'm feeling very nervous about it. I have to present.
Julia. Raise your hand.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, Julia, did you have a question or was that a raising of hands that you're feeling apprehensive?
Oh, both. I was wondering, will the Q&A be through the chat or be through just like speaking? And then also, will the mentor be also answering questions, or is it just the interns?
Those are great questions. Julia, you asked the question, right?
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
So there'll be about a minute for live Q&A, meaning we'll ask the members of the physical audience, members of the Zoom audience, to ask, 1 minute is probably time for one question. If it's a very simple question, we might, and depending on how long your presentation takes, we might be able to accommodate 2 questions. Most of the questions will be by chat after the talk on Zoom. Now, I think the intern should primarily be responsible for chiming in and answering questions. This is part of your part of what you do as a presenter. You answer questions. If your mentor is on the chat and you want to bounce a question to them, of course, that's absolutely fine to do that, assuming your mentor is okay with that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. And Adina had a question. Adina, the ACSO3 presentation will be, I think you'll be talking about 3 aspects of it. You'll be showing images of the 3D printed piece, be giving information about each person will be giving information about the microorganism that you studied, and you'd be presenting your portrait. And you'd be doing this through Google Slides, of course. Other questions? Oh, Arpon, please.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for the presentation. I learned a lot for our what we can do for our presentation because we're working on a technical paper. And I have a question that is kind of unrelated to this, but me and my teammates are working to write a paper on what we did. And we were curious if you can or SIP can actually have one class regarding how we can actually approach writing a research paper, or give us the general guidelines that we can follow to do that.
Absolutely. What subject area are you working in, Arpon?
We are working on artificial intelligence. It's called applied artificial intelligence.
AI, okay. So right below in the chat, right after the password PV 2022, Anand has put a link. These are very simple tips to technical writing that are applicable in my field, astronomy and astrophysics.
Mhm.
Maybe I would go over those with your mentor to see if they apply in your field of applied artificial intelligence. A good guide would be to read other people's work in that field to see how they structure papers. There may not be any one particular format. There may be more than one, but reading of papers in that discipline, those would be my suggestions. It also matters a lot what the venue is for your technical paper, whether you're presenting that as a conference paper or for a particular journal. That can determine the exact structure of your technical paper.
And can we expect our research mentor to be helping us after the program to write the paper, or at least a review?
I would say it's the other way around. You should start by asking your mentor if you can write a research paper, because the research is the intellectual property of your mentor. So first check with them before you embark on any kind of writing or publication.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Vidhi, question from you.
Yeah, I actually had 2 questions. So the link you sent us for the presentation day videos, they actually don't contain many artificial intelligence videos and computer science videos. And since I'm researching in that field, I wanted to look at some past presentations on that topic. So where could I find them?
Are you looking at 2022 or are you looking at earlier as well?
2022, and I did look at the earlier ones as well, but I wasn't able to find many artificial intelligence videos.
Look at 2020 and 2021. Part of it is this is a relatively new field in SIP. Your best guide is to look at CSE as well, computer science and engineering. because many of those have elements of machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Okay. And my second question was, my project is actually fully online, but I'm coming in person for the presentation. So how will the structure be? Will I be presenting in like a live room or will it be on Zoom?
No, you'll be presenting in a live room. Thank you for arranging to come here on presentation day. Do you know if any of your fellow interns will also be coming here? Will you be the only?
I'll be the only one.
Only one in your group. Okay, so what it'll be then, and this is not unusual at all, you'll be speaking live to an in-person audience. You'll also have a Zoom audience, but there'll be how many presenters will there be for your project?
We're three group
In
members.
total,
Yeah.
including you?
Yes.
Okay, so what will happen is for all of these presentations, you'll be rotating through the interns who are presenting. Let's say that in this case, there are 3 people. So let's say if you were doing the introduction of the material, why is this work important? Or let's say you were sharing that with one of the other interns. What you would do is you would speak, and then the other person who's sharing the introduction with you would unmute their Zoom and they would then speak. So it would be a combination of in-person and Zoom audio is how your presentation will be run. Now, if you want to be on the super safe side, each of the online presenters might consider recording the narrative portion, the part they're going to speak. That way, if there's any kind of failure with the audio or with the connection, if there is, then you could play that, you could play a recording of their audio portion, or you could speak on their behalf. Those are the, building in some safeguards is always a good idea, but the default plan will be you will speak in person, you'll bounce it to, person A on Zoom, who might bounce it back to you or might bounce it back to person B on Zoom, and that's how the 3 of you will speak through the slides. So when you're planning your slides, you're planning the content of the slides, but you're also planning a narrative and who's going to speak through each part of that narrative.
Okay, I see. So yeah, I'll let my teammates know about that.
It'll take some preparation and practice, of course.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Those are
Yeah.
great questions. Thanks. Others, in person or on Zoom, other questions? I know we're a little bit past 11 o'clock, but I want to, if we don't have any other questions, what I want to do is go to one of these links in the chat. And I just want to highlight just one very quick thing in here. Anand, I'm just going to open up this link here. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. I'm just going to,
Yeah, you can share your screen.
and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so again, these are technical writing tips in the most boring imaginable format. But this was put together by, one of our postdocs at the time, Alice Deason, 2 of my PhD students, Claire and Katie. And we first presented this at a high school in 2013, but I've been using this. If you take nothing away, one of the things that we found useful is sort of this basic structure of a technical paper. Why was the project carried out? What are the broader motivation and context? What was actually done? Description of the analysis steps, the tasks, methods, materials, data. What the researchers found, what you did versus what you found, which is a description of the basic results. What the findings mean, a bit of interpretation, even speculation. And then what comes next, future work. I find this to be a useful way to think about presentation, whether it's a slides-based, oral presentation, or if I'm doing a poster or a talk, this may be a good thing to keep in mind. The big picture is, the introduction. Why did you do all this work? It starts with an introduction, but I've written ends ? Because it's often easiest to write that introduction last. After you've written the rest of the paper, then talk about what is the big picture. Because once you've defined what you've done, and what you found and what it means. It's only after that that you can put this whole thing into context. And I tell my students to write the introduction and abstract at the very end of the process, after the rest of the paper is written, because you are really, you want to start broad and narrow down to your particular topic. The way I like to think of it is, you're all familiar with a funnel. If you have a narrow opening, like the opening of the gas tank of your car, and you're trying to pour fuel into that, it's very difficult to do that unless you have a funnel. A funnel has a wide opening, but it has a narrow outlet that you'd put into the opening of the gas tank of your car, and that way you can pour gasoline into that funnel. An introduction is like a funnel. You're trying to get people from a wide range of expertise and interest, wide range, that's what the opening of a funnel is, but you're trying to gradually channel them into the topic of research that you've done. So I really like to think of an introduction as the shape of a funnel. Something that I found really important is a technical paper or a research paper is not a travelogue. You don't have to describe in order what you did, when you did them, and your presentation should not be proportional. The time you spend on your presentation shouldn't be proportional to the time you spend on that particular aspect of the research. Instead, it should be a coherent story. You could have spent a couple of weeks on something that maybe deserve only a sentence in your presentation because they're not directly relevant to the story. Okay. Be prepared that you should not be writing a diary of everything you did in 8 weeks. And that's not a good way to structure your presentation. Instead, think about, how can I explain my story to my audience? What are the key points I want to cover? Again, don't try to impress your audience with jargon. Try to say things in the simplest possible way. Precision and economy of language are really things to be learned, things that will take you very, very far in life. Learn to be detailed but concise. Avoid extraneous things. Be consistent in your language. Make sure you cite everyone whose work you're bringing to, whose work you're relying on or you're building on. One of my colleagues used to say, every figure caption should be self-contained, should tell a story, and should have a clear take-home message. This is what I want you to take away from this figure. So much so that if you just read a paper and you read all the figures in a paper, you should understand what happened in that paper. Again, we talked about this. Write down a set of talking points or bullet points before you do any writing of actual prose. This particular website was about technical papers, not slides, but this applies. But for a talk versus technical paper, the level of detail is greater, of course, in a technical paper compared to a presentation. Greater emphasis on figures in a talk, minimal text. But the set of talking points you write down are identical, whether you're giving a talk or writing a paper. Anyway, I wanted to go through this set of tips, writing tips. I think I should stop here. Yeah. Those of you on Zoom, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for bearing with us with the late start and all that. Zoe, if you have a moment to stay back, I have a question to ask, please, of you. But we can also do this offline. If you prefer, we can chat very quickly. Okay, we're going to stop the recording.
Stop sharing, stop recording.